Greetings from Cincinnati, Ohio, rainy Cincinnati, Ohio, and week 5 of what's becoming my nostalgia tour. Today, I'm at the lovely home of my maybe longest friend, Dave Crislip, and his lovely wife, Denise. Dave and I went to high school together and college together, and it's been great catching up with Dave here in Cincinnati. Cincinnati will also be the beginning of the next leg of my tour, the Ohio to Erie, which goes from the Ohio River down here in Cincinnati all the way up to Lake Erie in Cleveland. I won't be going quite that far, as I'll be heading east over to Pittsburgh when I get to Massillon, Ohio. I've got to figure out how I'm going to get from Massillon to Pittsburgh. Anybody got a pickup truck? Anyway, but this is not about what's coming up. This is about the past week, which was mainly the fabulous Katy Trail across Missouri. I enjoyed it so much, and I'm going to be spending most of this video talking about that. By the way, to get from the end of the Katy Trail near St. Louis over to here in Cincinnati, as I did with Wyoming, I rented a truck and put my bike in the back of it and drove all the way from St. Louis to Cincinnati, skipping Illinois and Indiana, because I just couldn't find an enjoyable way to get across those two states. It was going to be mainly highways and long rolling hills in southern Indiana, and I just didn't want to do any more highways like that. So I'm jumping directly from the Katy Trail to the Ohio to Erie Trail. So the last video I stopped in Norfolk, Nebraska, and from there I rode my bike to Schuyler, I think it's pronounced, and it was a tough ride. It was 7 hours of busy highways and dirt roads, including Columbus, Nebraska. Before that, Nebraska along the Cowboy Trail had been very flat, but man, getting from Norfolk to Omaha involved some serious hills. It was challenging. But back in Nebraska on the Cowboy Trail, I met a lovely woman, Maylee Mason, and she said, by the way, if you're ever in Omaha, give me a call and you can crash at my place. So when I knew I was going to be coming to Omaha, I looked her up and she said, yeah, come on and crash. And she had a lovely little guest house, and she and her sister Ann put me up for a night and took me to a wonderful breakfast, and that was just some great tour magic to have a lovely place to stay for that one night in the, not Omaha proper, the suburb of Florence, Nebraska. Then it was from Omaha to Clinton, Missouri, and the beginning of the Katy Trail. And I don't want to be too redundant, but man, I really loved the Katy Trail. What an awesome trail. It was flat, it was smooth. I complained about the Cowboy Trail having kind of a loose surface that I felt like I was riding through sand at times. Not with the Katy Trail. It was nice and hard, mainly tree shrouded. I really enjoyed the Katy Trail. But let's get into details. The first day, I rode my bike from Clinton to Sedalia. At the beginning at Clinton, there's a little bell that you ring to announce you're starting the trail. Here comes the next big adventure, 265 miles on the Katy Trail. I've been looking forward to this ever since I started planning the route. You're supposed to announce the beginning of your ride. That's loud. There at the beginning and many other places along the ride, there are these little tool stands which include a lot of the tools you'd need to do most bike repairs and a pump, and they're all along the trail. The other thing that is all along the Katy Trail are these old train stops, whistle stops, where the train would stop at each little town, and at each of these little train stops, train stations, whatever you want to call them, there is a history of that area. And I took pictures of all of them. I'm not going to bore you with every one of those histories of all these little towns, but they were fascinating. A lot of them involved Lewis and Clark, because the Lewis and Clark expedition followed pretty much the Katy Trail when they were getting started, heading west out of St. Louis. And so I learned a lot about Lewis and Clark. and the Missouri River. So as much as I loved the trail, when I got to Sedalia, I'm following all the tour guides and stuff that say the best campground is to go to the Missouri State Fairgrounds in Sedalia. So I did, and the campground was horrible. It was this huge open expanse with only a couple of trees, no restrooms except for the fairground restroom in a distant corner, no place to plug in electricity, no water. There were places you could pitch your tent out in the open in this grass, but it was just terrible. So I backtracked back down the Katy Trail about 5 miles total to Lazy Liz's little RV campground. And I spent my first night on the Katy Trail there, just outside Sedalia. Lovely little RV park. There were raccoons getting into my panniers at night while I was asleep in my tent. I stuck my flashlight out, get out of here, and they didn't, but I eventually chased the raccoons off. But that was fine. And then I got back on the trail and redid those 5 miles from Sedalia. And I never saw any major wildlife on the Katy Trail. There were box turtles and possum, raccoon, snake, vultures. I'll show you pictures of various kinds of critters, but nothing really as spectacular as back in Oregon and that sort of thing. Or certainly not when I was driving up around Yellowstone. There were no bison on the Katy Trail. When I got to from Sedalia, I went to Franklin, which apparently got wiped out by a flood. So then there's New Franklin, which is where I spent the night. Lovely campground. I was the only person there in the afternoon. And then a couple of thru bikers showed up, bikepackers going east to west. And it was nice to meet them. And then another gentleman showed up from the Netherlands going in my direction, Raymond. And Raymond and I sat and talked and hit it off and had a really good conversation. And then the next morning, I headed out of the New Franklin campground towards Jefferson City. Got up before those guys were up and on my way. And that ride from New Franklin to Jefferson City, like many of these rides of 40, 50 miles, no place to get stuff. No gas stations, no convenience stores, nothing. So I was glad I had everything I needed along the way. There was water at a couple of little train depots, but no place to buy snacks and food and that sort of thing. When I got to Jefferson City, I crossed the river, the Missouri River, the mighty Missouri. It's wide. The bridge was tall. I'm afraid of heights, but I managed to get my bike across the river and into Jefferson City for a nice meal and that sort of thing. That was first of several times that I crossed the river. And as often as not, I walked my bike across the river because of my fear of heights and that sort of thing. From Jefferson City, the next stop was Hermann. It's a very German town in the middle of Missouri. There's a Mozart house, Mozart bridge, lots of things named after German things, Rheinplatz or something like that. Lovely campground in the middle of town, about 5 miles off the Katy Trail, but it was worth it. Shower in the public restrooms and that sort of stuff, which is what I've gotten used to. In the middle of the night, a person, like 11 a.m., middle of the night for me, a person is, anybody in that tent? Anybody in that tent? I could use some help. What do you want? I'm trying to find the Mozart house, and I can't help you. I don't know where it is. I'll give you some weed if you'll help me find the Mozart house. Please go away. It was that kind of night. But the next morning, I was up and riding again. Before I got to Hermann, that gentleman, Raymond, the Dutch guy, had caught up to me, and we went into Hermann together and camped at the same place at that small campground. I mentioned that I took a shower that night. I take a shower most nights because a lot of these city parks have showers, and it really helps, especially when you're on something like the Katy Trail where you just get so dusty and grimy. Again, I love it, but you do get dusty and grimy, and to take a shower right before you get into your bed system is really nice, and I did that night. So now, that day I'm cruising down the trail. I said I didn't see any big wildlife. Well, it wasn't a big wildlife, but there was a huge black cow right there on the trail. And I think I'm going to just quietly ride around it. And as soon as I started to pass it, it started running down the trail. And now I'm riding side by side with this huge cow. And I guess that was probably the most harrowing wildlife encounter I've had so far this whole trip. But it finally went off the trail a bit, and I made it by, and I survived the big black cow. Next was the ride from Herman to Augusta. Augusta was my last night on the trail, yeah. Augusta is down along the river, and a very steep bluff leads up to a beautiful park called the Klondike Park there in eastern Missouri. And it was hot that day. So when I got up to the park, I pitched my tent and everything, and then I walked down to this lake and actually got in the lake and just stood there for a few minutes in the lake, which felt great. And then went back to camp. Had a lovely dinner at my tent and on a picnic table. The things that make for a perfect night to me: a flat place to pitch my tent, preferably in the shade, ideally where it's going to have morning sun to burn off some of the moisture of the dew, and a picnic table where I can lay out my stuff and cook my dinner, and if possible, a shower and a bathroom nearby. And the Klondike Park campground had all of that, which was just awesome. There were a couple of ladies, a few campsites over, but other than that, it was just me. And I thought it might rain that night according to the forecast, so I got ready kind of early. And sure enough, about 7:30, I hear thunder, so I go in the tent. Shortly thereafter, the storm started, and man, it rained on and off, thunder, serious, all night long. And it was enough wind that it's coming up under the rainfly of my tent, and a few things got kind of damp in my tent, not really wet, but the tent itself just had all this junk knocked up on it, and it was filthy, so I had to deal with cleaning that off later down the road. But one of the reasons I mentioned the big thunderstorms is because the next morning I'm like, oh man, the trail's going to be just so messy, and there's going to be mud puddles, and it's going to be awful. Not at all. By the time I was down to the trail at 7 a.m., it was hard, it was flat, there weren't puddles anywhere, it had all just been absorbed in or run off. It was amazing. The trail was in great shape after an entire night of thunderstorms. There was one point where I had to stop and get off my bike to move a tree that had fallen off the trail, but otherwise, except for a couple of little damp spots that I could easily go around, the trail was great even after a big thunderstorm. I was so happy about that. There were thunderstorms like crazy last night, and yet the trail is still just about perfect. Amazing that it's not full of puddles and mud. And now even the dust has gone away. I just love the Katy Trail. I'm coming up to one of the stations. Oh my gosh, the sun's out. Woo-hoo! I got started at 7 o'clock this morning, expecting to have a sloppy, messy trail, but this has been just perfect. And let's see, what time am I coming up on? It looks like Matson, Missouri. I'm looking left and right, and I don't see any stores or anything, so I'll keep on going. And because I'm catching this with video, I'm not going to stop and take a picture for, I think, the first time ever. So, loving the Katy Trail. The fact that this morning, my last day on the trail, it's just gorgeous. It's perfect. And it rained like heck all last night. Just amazing. Coming out of Augusta rather, into St. Charles, you're getting close to St. Louis, I guess maybe that's why, but there was about 5 miles where it felt kind of like an industrial park. It just wasn't very attractive at all. But then when I got to St. Charles, it was beautiful. The waterfront there, a big park, Katy Trail going right through the park. It was wonderful. But then going north out of St. Charles, back into farm country, to the official terminus of the Katy Trail at Mockins, there's just nothing. Mockins, the trail just ends. There's not even a road there. So I think the trail more or less officially should end at St. Charles, because that's beautiful, and that's where you can arrange transportation and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, got to St. Charles. That day I saw possum, deer, snake, rabbits, the usual stuff. Um, and again, I mentioned that there's a lot of long stretches along the trail where there's no gas stations, convenience stores, places where you can buy stuff. There was one store, I guess it was between Herman and Augusta, where Raymond and I stopped at a little campground, and there was a little kiosk, self-serve, refrigerator, all kinds of soft drinks, candy bars, stuff like that, and you just leave money in the little jar to pay for the stuff, all trusted, serve yourself. That was very cool, and I stocked up on a Yoo-Hoo and an RC and at least one candy bar, and it was just great. But there's a lot of the way that there's just nothing between the towns, except that last stretch between Augusta and St. Charles. There's one of these little whistle stops called Defiance, and man, there was a bike shop, there was an ice cream place, there was a burger joint, all right on the trail, set up just to serve the riders, all in Defiance, Missouri. If those had been spread out along the trail, that would have been great. But if you're coming east to west out of St. Charles, look forward to Defiance, because there's a lot of cool stuff there. And then there's not much farther west than that. Okay, so there in St. Charles, I rented a truck and loaded my bike up to make the move from St. Charles to here in Cincinnati. I stopped at the St. Louis Arch, the Gateway Arch, which I'd never seen before in St. Louis. That was very cool. That's kind of like when I did all that Wyoming stuff and went to all those national monuments and stuff. And then made it here to Dave and Denise's place, and it's raining today. I'm really glad I didn't try to go out today because it's been thunder and nasty and that sort of stuff. Tomorrow looks good, so Dave's going to try to take me to the trailhead for the Ohio to Erie Trail in downtown Cincinnati, and off I go. And I'll take the next several days to make my way up there. There's several friends, hi Pam, hi Mike, that I hope to see on my way through Ohio. And then when I get to Massillon, I'm going to try to find somebody with an SUV or a pickup truck or something that can get me over to Pittsburgh to pick up the Allegheny Gap Trail, or the Gap Trail as it's called. And that'll take me to the C&O Canal to Washington, D.C. So that's week 5. Hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope some of these nature shots are a little more what some of you had in mind. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.